Hello, and welcome to a video guide for a specific part of the Apex Vanguard encounter in the Dxun Nature of Progress operation in Star Wars The Old Republic. This is a relatively straightforward fight, except for the person who runs the battery. So I thought it'd be helpful to make a video guide specifically dedicated to talking about everything you need to know to effectively handle most of the mechanics in this fight. So we're going to be talking about what the battery is, what the stations are, how to run it, things to think about, the patterns, the mechanics, a couple tips and tricks, and how to swap and things of that nature. So hopefully we'll cover everything you need to know. Important thing to note here is at the beginning of the fight, you really don't have anything extra to do, so you're just basically helping DPS the boss until photogenesis happens. At which point then we've got to DPS the panel, and then we can take out the battery, and then at that point we start dealing with mechanics. So as we see as we're leading up to that, in terms of role, having an off-tank do it or a DPS do it is typically advisable because you will maybe have some limited time to do some damage on the boss, but for the most part, especially later on in the phase, you're really just going to be running the battery. So it's not typically a great idea for a healer to do it. Although you can do it with any role if you're well balanced and coordinate with your other players. Okay, so here we are. See the video. We're starting to run the battery. So before we kind of walk through this in real time, let's talk about a few kind of specific mechanics and kind of talk through everything, and then we'll see it in real time. So here is a zoomed in and then blown up screenshot of the battery itself. It's not always really evident the first time you do this, but when you look really closely or you zoom in, you can see clearly there are these horizontal bars that correspond to battery charges. So you can see here there's 6 total. There's 2 blue, 3 yellow, and then 1 red. Now for story mode, the blue versus yellow doesn't really matter, but the red one does. So effectively we have our first 5 charges, and then we have the red charge. That's going to matter in terms of how those are used for each battery panel, so just bear that in mind. You've got a number of charges. Anytime you're carrying the battery around, if you know to look for it, it's actually pretty easy to see. But again, if it's your first time doing it, that isn't necessarily apparent. So I just want to make sure we're aware of that. As a practical matter in story mode, you don't typically have to keep an eye on how many charges you have because of how the mechanics work, which we'll talk about. But it's good to know, good to keep in mind, just so that you're aware of it. Alright, so here is a layout of the room. Since it's circular, it can be a little bit confusing and easy to lose your orientation. So a good way to look at it is oriented to the minimap, so that's how it's presented here. One thing to note is there are 2 stations at the northeast and southeast. They're noted here as flares and stems. Those are hard mode only, so you can't actually use them in story mode, but the little panel to plug in the battery is actually active, so it's important to not go to those. Those icons will be grayed out, so the only ones we worry about are the disruptor station at north, the fan station at east, and the wash station at south, and then of course the power transformer, which is where we got the battery. So as we go through these in sequence, each of these is designed to deal with a specific mechanic. So the disruptor station at the north is the most important one. Using the disruptor station drains all of your battery charges, and that's designed to remove mass target lock. Now I'll point this out in real time as we see the mechanics, but when mass target lock goes out, you have 30 seconds to cleanse the debuff because everyone gets targeted. If you don't do that, Apex uses bombardment, which is a raid-wide AoE, and if he has really any stacks of Darkness Overdrive at all, he typically will wipe the group or kill most of the group. So super important. Every time you use the disruptor station, you have to recharge the battery. The fan station at east is used to cleanse red venom, so every time that goes out, people pick up a stack of the red venom dot every few seconds, and then they eventually will die from damage. You go there, you can cleanse the red venom. It takes 1 charge to do that, and you can do that many times, since again you have 5 of those charges to cleanse it, so you can do that every time you need it. The south station at wash is used to deal with the acid blast mechanic. Acid blast is the big yellow puddle that gets put under the tank. So eventually you would run out of room to kite the boss because of those puddles, because they don't naturally dissipate. So when you go to the wash station, you can use 1 charge, and that will wash the floors and cleanse the acid blast puddles. So each of these stations deals with 1 mechanic. In order, I talked about them in order of priority. Disruptor station, if you need to use it, is the most important. The fans is the next most important. And then the wash station, it is ultimately important, but you have an enormous amount of flexibility to use it when it's convenient. So basically use it when you can, but the other 2 definitely come first. So here's just a video. A great way to get practice at running the battery, if you've never done it, is actually after you kill Apex, because all of these mechanics are operational. So here I am, I have the battery plugged into the wash station. I'm literally just clicking it. So you can see you plug it in on the left, the station in the middle lights up, you click it, you notice how it loses a charge, and then emergency wash is activated. That will cleanse the acid blast. Now notice here, I've just used the 5th charge. All I've got left is the one at the bottom. If I try to use the station again, it's going to give me an error. I don't have a charge because I can't use that last battery charge for the wash station. So here I'm going to go in, and here's how we're going to recharge. So I'm going to go plug it into the middle. It takes about 5 seconds in story mode, and all the charges come back at once. You'll see here, and boom, there we go. Now we may sometimes want to leave the battery in there a little bit longer, which I'll talk about shortly. But generally speaking, if all you're caring about is the recharge, you just grab it. So here we're at the fans. So again, we have full charges. We use the station. We use 1 charge. So we dropped 1. And that would have cleansed the dot if we had them going out. And then I'm just going to do that a couple of more times just to show it functions in the exact same way. Then we're going to go recharge, and we'll go to the other station. We'll talk more about this briefly, but the red venom is very important to get to quickly. It's not a huge deal if people get up to like 4, 5, 6, 7 stacks of red venom. It's typically not a huge issue for your healers. But if you get up to 15 to 20 stacks, it can be very, very dangerous. So you have a little bit of flexibility with this station, but you obviously can't ignore it. So here we go. We'll use 1 more charge. And then we're going to have the same issue. We can use the first 5. We can't use the last one. So we try to use it again. It's going to give us the same error message. And then we're going to go back to recharge, which as a practical matter, what we'll talk about shortly is the way of the timing is because for the most part, you're alternating between stations. But anyway, the last charge you can use for the disruptor panel. So notice, even though I only have that 1 charge left, I couldn't use the other 2, but I can still use the disruptor station, which means the only time you can't use the disruptor station is if you just use the disruptor station, because you can't use that last charge. That's going to be important in kind of the pathing and kind of priority to how you run the battery. So here we recharged it. We use the disruptor station, and we still go all the way down to 0. Okay, so we've kind of talked through the mechanics at a high level. You've seen the layout, you've seen the battery. Now we're going to kind of run this in real time, and then I'm going to kind of narrate as we go. So again, we're going to start just basically DPSing the boss until photogenesis happens. Then we're going to damage the transformer panel and grab the battery, and then we actually start dealing with mechanics. So again, in terms of role, it's important to note pretty much anybody can run the battery. If you have a second tank, an off tank is in many cases the most convenient because your opportunity cost is the lowest, because tanks don't do as much DPS as a DPS player, and they, a healer can be very valuable. So going from 2 healers to 1 healer is doable, but is a fair bit more risk. So often the off tank's the most convenient, but a DPS player can do it, a healer can do it. If you're really careful about Darkness Overdrive, this fight can be solo healed without it being too terribly difficult, but it does mean that it's more important to manage Darkness Overdrive, as I'll discuss here in a little bit. So anyone can do it. Often it's the off tank. Another thing to note is there's a little bit of a trick for Inquisitors or Jedi Consulars that can make this running the battery solo pretty easy. So those classes can solo the battery fairly easily. Other classes can do it, but it's quite a bit more difficult. What you'll notice is you put force speed on your bar, and so the thing with the battery is it's like a few other mechanics elsewhere in the fight or in the game, where once you pick it up, you can't use abilities. So if you use it either just before you pick up the battery or basically jam on that button as you're picking up the battery, you can get those movement buffs. And force speed has a low cooldown, which is really, really helpful. So anyway, so the first mechanic is always going to be Red Venom Cloud. And you're going to have a minute from when you pick up the battery until that happens. So you always want to go east on your minimap, plug it in. You don't need to use it yet. You can come DPS the boss, or you can honestly just kind of hang out, I guess. Here I come add a little bit of DPS just to help. The first 3 mechanics are always going to have a minute between them. So early on in the fight, it's going to feel really, really easy to run the battery because you've got more time than you need. After the 3rd mechanic, you're going to have 30 seconds, so it's going to get a bit tighter. So here I just got Red Venom Cloud, so I'm just going to run over. The batteries are in there, so I just go click the middle panel, cleanses everyone's stacks. I know that now I have a minute from when Red Venom went out until I get the next one, which is Mass Target Lock. So I'm going to go in and get a wash. Now the ordering of these is always the same in story mode based on, I've seen this now 12 or 15 times. I've recorded a bunch of them. It always seems to be the exact same. So my understanding is it is 100% consistent, which is you start with Red Venom, then you have a Mass Target Lock, then you have 2 Red Venoms, and then 2 Mass Target Locks, and then you repeat the cycle. So one Red Venom, Mass Target Lock, Red Venom, Mass Target Lock, repeat. And again, after the first 3 of those, incrementally, so after we go Red Venom with a minute, Mass Target Lock with a minute, Red Venom with a minute, and then it's 30 seconds for all of them. So we can see here we got the Mass Target Lock, so we're going to go plug it in and drain it. Remember, anytime we use Mass Target Lock, it drains the battery. As I mentioned before, the only time you have to recharge it is when you use the battery at the disruptor panel to cleanse Mass Target Lock. Otherwise, you should be able to use the others without ever needing to recharge it. But here's where the whole Darkness Overdrive stacks come into play. Now, you may have noticed we are at relatively high stacks right after that Mass Target Lock. My battery's recharged here, but I'm leaving it in longer to get his stacks down to 0. The reason for that is, again, each of those stacks cause him to deal about 10% more damage. In story mode, his single target damage to the tank is very low, and his AoE damage is pretty low as well. When he gets to 20 stacks, he's basically dealing triple damage, which is rather high. So I highly suggest that anytime you recharge the battery, you leave it in long enough to get those stacks down to 0. Okay, so you can see here we've got kind of a lot of puddles here. So I left it at Red Venom until we had it, and now I'm going to go get an acid wash, or get the wash station to cleanse all the acid blasts to help, and now we're back to a nice clean floor. So we've talked about most of the mechanics here, about each station. Again, the key is follow the mechanics. I highly suggest focus targeting Apex and making sure that focus target cast bar is where you see it. So here I left it in the middle of my screen, so I can't help but see it. So I've got Red Venom, and you just follow the mechanics. For the most part, managing tired isn't going to be too bad, except for when you have to use 2 consecutive Mass Target Locks. That's when it gets to be a little bit tricky because you're carrying the battery almost continuously. And because of the rate at which you gain stacks and drop stacks of tired, you basically have to be carrying the battery for less time than you're not for those stacks to drop. Now we're going to do a kind of a clean kill video without all my narrating here shortly, and so I encourage you to keep an eye on that. For the most part, I keep it fairly low. It's much easier for shadows, assassins, inquisitors, and sages to do that because of force speed. If you are not familiar with this or any other class, I'd highly suggest having another player familiar with the mechanics to be your backup. And when you do 2 Mass Target Locks, so here we had one, we recharged it, and then we had a second one. This is when it's really common to get too many stacks of tired, and that's when you'd probably want to have somebody swap, and then they can run the mechanics until the next time you get 2 Mass Target Locks, about a couple of minutes later, and then you can take over and your stacks will be gone. If you get in that 20 to 30 range of stacks of tired, that's when it slows you up enough that it's really going to be a problem. And so that's when I usually suggest being a trigger to do a swap. You can solo it with other classes. You just need to be very, very careful about anytime you pick up the battery, take it where it needs to go. If you're not sure where it needs to go, you can drop it. You see the little purple button there in the middle. That'll drop it on the floor, as you've probably seen me do a couple times in this clip, where it puts a circle on the ground. You just walk back through the circle to pick it up when you need it. And that's really it. Try to stay ahead. Where you get into trouble is when it takes you so long to get to one station that you only barely cleanse it in time. That's when you can run into to problems. If there are class speed boosts, particularly if you have like a Sentinel and Marauder, and you can get an occasional Predation or Transcendence, that's good to know. One thing to note here, you can see I'm having difficulty clicking it. Apex's hitbox is so freaking huge that if he's anywhere near that station, it could be really problematic to either pick up the battery or click the panel. So if the boss is near, it's good to kind of call out to the tank, hey, can you move the boss away from me here? And also in a general sense, from a kiting perspective, oftentimes we'll try to not kite the acid blast puddles onto those stations, so you don't have to stand in them. But as you can see here, when we did this with a newer tank, we were just like, you know what, you can just kind of tank them wherever. It's not a big deal. As long as you go in, go out, it shouldn't be a big issue. That's really it. Follow the mechanics. Get a swap when you need it. Keep an eye on your tired stacks. Once you've done this a few times, it's relatively easy. Easier for Shadow Sins, Inquisitors, and Sages, but still doable by anybody, I think. So anyway, hope this is helpful. We'll do another kill video, basically the same video again, without all the talking. So again, main thing to keep an eye on is stacks tired, and notice the pattern. Again, one red venom, one mass target lock, 2 red venoms, 2 target locks, and then repeat. And so when you kind of have that and you know kind of where you are in that pace, I highly recommend writing it down. That way you can refresh yourself, and you can almost kind of work your way down the list of, okay, where am I in the pace? What's coming next? And then based on how far ahead you are, you fit in a wash whenever you can. And otherwise, you're pretty much good. So there you go. We'll run this again without the talking. So hopefully that's helpful. But good luck. I think this operation's a really great, a lot of fun. Apex is really cool. And there's even more fun to be had running the battery in hard mode. So this is really good prep for that. So anyway, thanks for watching. Hope this is helpful. Bye.
Challengers have managed to meaningfully injure the Apex Vanguard, but nothing could be further from the truth. We call this groundbreaking innovation Photogenesis. Its efficacy is profound. Even heavy artillery fire can't keep pace with this regenerative power.
You need to kill the lights immediately. Destroy the central power transformer, then pull out the backup battery cells.
While nearly immortal in the light, the Apex Vanguard is truly lethal at night.
Oh, great!
Nara, we need a neutralizer.
Every second the creature spends in darkness enhances its strength and lethality, thanks to our patented Darkness Overdrive engine system.
The cage is sealed. The only thing's in there. Maybe you could use the backup battery to run the equipment.
Ground team, do you copy? Move the battery to the neutralizer station as soon as possible.
going to kitchen sink a Jedi only to have him throw it right back?
Get the battery to the air filtration system now!
With our innovative new Crimson Venom aerosol, you'll have them try to use the Force to push away the very air they breathe. Frantically chasing down elusive targets? We sure are. That's why every Apex Vanguard comes equipped with state-of-the-art, multi-target guided missile batteries.
The disruptor pulse will break that target lock, but it will completely drain the battery. You can recharge it in the central transformer.
Demonstration complete. Returning to normal communication protocols.
Is it actually dead? Or is this just another marketing ploy?
It's still in the prototype phase, I'm afraid.
And it'll stay there if I have anything to say about it.
Let's table this discussion for now. Mechs, get our cleanup teams down there ASAP. Ground team, please report back for debriefing.